Hello, this is Lloyd Crooks again, continuing my teaching about in terms of modern textual criticism and some of the issues with textual criticism and the critical text. So basically, following on from the last video I did, we looked at Cursor Lakes, looking at the text that was used in Alexandria at the particular periods, and he basically worked with the fathers, with Oregon, who were Clements of uh, Alexandria, and I think Cyril as well. So basically, this is what he summed up. So we're going to go into that in a bit. He said, "We shall not make up our minds to regard Westcott and Hort's edition a failure, though a failure without we would be poor indeed, insofar it's not succeeded." So basically, Westcott and Hort Greek New Testament, it's insofar as not succeeding reconstruction as it claims to do so, the original Greek, the Gospels, but instead reconstructed the text which was dominant in Alexandria, not in the first, but in the second stage of the history of the text of that city. We shall have, in fact, regard to it and the manuscript which is based on as secondary rather than primary authorities for the text of the New Testament. Furthermore, we shall have to admit that for the earlier period of textual criticism, they are no pure. Okay, so as we're going to sort of go into the slide, let's look at in terms of Codex Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Siniaticus. Before I sort of go into the slide itself, Codex Vaticanus was not so much discovered, but its first recording was in the Vatican Library in about the 15th century. Interesting thing is that Erasmus, who compiled the first printed Greek New Testament, had access to readings from Vaticanus. Erasmus, being a Catholic, he had connections within the Vatican, and he had access to this. Yeah, so Vaticanus was found on the shelf or on the shelf in the 15th century. As to where it came from, there's been a lot of theories, but no real facts. But they reckon it was based in Egypt. But one of the things I want to sort of look at is what is said about Vaticanus. So this is in terms of Scrivener, FHA Scrivener, quoting Dobinson. It said, one marked feature characteristic of this copy, which is Vaticanus, the great number of its omissions, which has induced Dr. Dobbin to speak of it as presenting an abbreviated text of New Testament. And certainly the fact he states on this point, and startling enough, he calculates that Codex B leaves out words or whole clauses no less than 330 times in Matthew, 365 times in Mark, 439 in Luke, 357 in John, 384 in the book of Acts, 681 in the surviving epistles, 2,556 in all, times in all. That no small proportion of these are mere oversights of the scribes seems evident, all right? Because the same scribe keeps on making the same mistakes again, yeah? So in terms of this is a nutshell in terms of what they were saying about Codex Vaticanus. Herman Hoske was a lot more stronger in his views of it. Sorry, his views of it. He said, in the first place, we do not believe the scribe of B was a Christian. It seems to be more of a lesser Western Unitarian. And he of B was quite uninterested in the work and given as being a professional penman to register follow marks here and there. So, in fact, Herman Hoske also said in his book, Codex B and Allies, he said, Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus should be given the palm. Yeah, given the palm. Yeah, so he was quite strong with his words on that. Okay, let's look at Sinaiticus. Now, Sinaiticus was found in St. Catherine's Monastery by Tischendorf. And what happened with that particular manuscript was actually found in a bin. And the interesting thing is that the monk still called Tischendorf the thief, right? Because he took there was actually in the bin ready to be burnt. And he found it, took it, realized the age of it, and he managed to get more parts of Codex Sinaiticus. Yeah, so originally it was found in the bin. It's also known as Codex Alf, and FHA Scribner said there was loads of mistakes. Yeah, and he gives an example of repeated word endings, and he gives an example like ethically, humanely, lovingly. Yeah. So there's a lot of copying and repeating of words, right? Um, and also you find with these Codex Sinaiticus, I said there was no, they reckon it was the most corrected manuscript ever. All right. The other thing I want to sort of say about, I think Dean Burgon made this statement. He said, can you imagine we didn't really have the, according to modern textual critics, we didn't have the Bible until uh, Sinaiticus was discovered out of a bin, and Vaticanus was actually discovered in the record of a librarian in the 15th century. So, in a sense, what modern textual scholars are saying, we didn't really have a Bible until the 19th century, yeah, with the special discovery of Sinaiticus. The Jesuit scholar Jose Maria Bové, in his special study of the codices which support each theory. Now remember, he's Jose Maria Bové is a Catholic, so he has very close access to Codex Vaticanus, yeah. And Sinaiticus is in the British Library now. I mean, when I first saw Codex Sinaiticus, I was amazed how well preserved it was. And this was over like 20, maybe 25 years ago, when it was in the British Museum. It's actually moved to the British Library now. And I was just amazed how well preserved Codex Sinaiticus was. So he's a Jesuit scholar. He would have access to Codex Vaticanus. And he said the important or serious deviations are found in the Alexandrians and the Westerns, the slight ones in the Antiochans, which is the Byzantine. In profound modifications, the Alexandrians and the Westerns are to be suspected. Remember, this is a Jesuit scholar. In addition, principally the Western, in slight changes or retouches, Antiochian, which is the Byzantine. But Codex B, Aleph, D managed to axe or the scalpel. The Antiochans or the Byzantine, the file or varnish. So basically, it's fairly quite light touch, the Byzantine scribes and copyists, but they seem to do a hatchet job with the Alexandrian copyists. Now, I put this, it's very sort of tongue-in-cheek, as we say in England. Was the Dean John Burgon a prophet? Yeah. Now, I'm saying this with a tongue-in-cheek. I'm saying a bit of humour. So hence I put this slide, the prophet Burgon. So he stated over 100 years ago, all right, say 19th century, no progress is possible in the department of textual criticism until the superstition, for we are persuaded that is nothing less, which at present prevails concerning certain of the old unseals, as they are called, have been abandoned. So he's saying textual criticism will never progress until you drop this superstition, this elevation of especially Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, Codex, right? Which is by common sense in the 4th century. Yeah. So you talk about the 5 codices, yeah, but the main ones, if you look in Bruce Metz's textual commentary, Reuben Swanson's text of the Greek New Testament, there is an over-reliance on a minority of manuscripts, which is Codex Vaticanus, Codex Siniaticus. Yeah. So remember, so Dean Burgon said this 100 years ago. He said, and I'm going to repeat this point: no progress is possible in the Department of Textual Criticism until the superstition, for we are persuaded it's nothing less, that at present prevails concerning certain of the old unseals, as they are called, have been abandoned. Now look what Eldon J. Epp, top scholar, 100 years, he said, Westcott and Hawke's reliance on Codex B along with Aleph was tested to use J.K. Eliot's emotionally charged but not incorrect phrase. So Eldon J. Epp's agreeing with J.K. Eliot to see whether their cult of the best manuscripts was justified. He used the term cult. Burgon called it superstition. The resultant general conclusion is that a single or merely a few manuscripts could not be the basis of a critical edition. Okay, that's Dean Burgon. Let's see what else Prophet Burgon says. Was Burgon right? Eldon J. Epp was speaking about the impact of newly discovered papyri on modern Greek print edition. He states, after all, none of these new discoveries has dislodged Codices Vaticanus and Siniaticus from their preeminent place in the whole structure. So, What you notice after Westcott Hort did his Greek printed Greek New Testament is that in the 1930s there was a number of discovery of papyri, and they give them numbers: papyri 75, P46, P45, P53. They were discovered, yeah, but they didn't really have any impact, unless the only impact they had is if they supported Codex B, which is Vaticanus, or Codex Aleph, which is Siniaticus. That's the only thing it actually influences. But you don't find them saying, okay, let's go for the P75. And these papyri are like 100 years, over 100 years older than Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So here what Kenneth Clark says. All these are sort of top scholars. He says, since 88, 25, since 1988, since 88, 1888, 25 editors have passed over 75, 80, yeah, 1888. 20, 25 editors have edited about 75 editions of the Greek New Testament. The collation of these many critical edition texts consists of exposing the fact that each of them is basically a repetition of the Westcott Hort text. Indeed, we have continued for 85 years to live in the era of Westcott Hort. Our Textus Recepticus, the received text by all right? So this is what they're saying. They said, look, despite all the additions of the Nessus of Land, that Bob Society, they're basically still following the Westcott Hort text, and all the revisions seem to be bringing them back to the Westcott Hort text. And if also you have to remember that my previous presentation, that Land, the father, he worked from printed editions, and one was the Westcott Hort edition. Okay. Eldon J. It may surprise many to learn that over a period of 80 years, repeating what Kenneth Clark said, these Nestles and Nestles texts through the 25 editions remain the same, apart from a few minor changes adopted by Erwin Nessel, no more than a dozen at most, and therefore also maintain the same closeness to Westcott Hort. Yet, as noted above, NA 26 and 27, with the United Bible Society equivalent, still remained closer to Westcott Hort than any other editions. They went on to state that the Westcott Hort text has become the default position. This is why there's been so little change. It is evident, therefore, that the principles of Westcott Hort have become so embedded in textual criticism, it's almost impossible to break free from them, despite the implication. I really want to label this point, despite the implication of the hard evidence. And then we've got Herman Hosker. He did 2 volumes. The book's called Codex B and its Allies. And he compared the readings with Codex B and Siniaticus, and he found 3,036 differences, quite a lot of differences. 656 in Matthew, 567 in Luke, 791, 791 in Luke, 1,022 in John. Now, when you consider, and the total is 3,036. Now, the interesting thing is that Matthew and Luke are the biggest gospels in terms of size, and but yet you've got 1,022 in John. And it's interesting, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's interesting that the purpose of John's gospel was to show that Jesus was the Son of God. And also you look at particular readings, like John 9:35, where he says, the majority message says, do you believe that I'm the Son of God? Then it says, in terms of the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, says, do you believe I'm the Son of Man? That is never, ever, in terms of the style of John, asked anyone to believe in him because he was the Son of Man. That was never said. Also, the famous one, John 1:18. John 1:18 says, refers to the only begotten God, right? Now, the majority message says only begotten Son. Now, this, interesting, that phrase was used by John about 3-4 times, all right? Only begotten Son. So, but there's nowhere mentioned only begotten God, all right? But it's interesting to note, most of the differences, right, is in John's Gospel. I've got the famous 5, the Fab 5, Felix Aleph, B, Felix Alexandrus, Beza, and Ephraimi. And these are the ones which are mainly built, but really it's Aleph, Siniaticus, and B is the one that's mainly used. So an example is given, I think it's by Jean John Burgon, and you look, did they actually agree? Okay, let's have a look. Oops. Right. So basically, when he looked at Luke's Gospel, chapter 8, 35, verse 35 to 44, that's just 10 verses, yeah? And in those 10 verses alone, Codex D had 93 singular readings. It's only found in D. Codex A um, exhibited 2, which are peculiar to A. It's in 10 verses, you know. Codex B had 6. Aleph had 5. Codex C um, had 7 readings affecting 15 words, peculiar to itself. Now, and also you had emission substitutions. You had a lot of copious involvement in those 10 verses, you know. And they didn't come to agreement. You had 5 codes supposed to be from the same area, didn't come to agreement. So the 5 old unisals, they did not agree with those verses. Yeah, all right. So are they the best? And we have to look at what one defines as best, what qualifies best, because the only thing that's come across as the best, because one, Codex Vaticanus and Siniaticus, is that they contain most of the New Testament, and 2, they're old. But that doesn't mean they're the best. Yeah, it doesn't mean they're the best, because one of the things that you will notice, they weren't really copied. You've got monks who work with copying manuscripts all the time and reading over them. And so in St. Catherine's Monastery, they put it in the bin. In fact, it was never copied. You don't find that Codex Siniaticus or Vaticanus was an exemplar for any manuscript. It was never copied. Yeah, and certainly never copied across the Eastern Empire at all, the Byzantine Empire. So it was never adopted. It was never copied. It had no children. Yeah. So it's interesting that it's the best purely on age, and it contains most of the Old Testament. There's nothing, no other qualifying standards, because when you have the best, you have to compare it to something. So, for example, if you've got a race, who's the fastest runner? Well, he's the best because he's beat a field of others. Yeah, but there's no qualifying characteristic that Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are the best by comparison outside of age and outside it contains most of the New Testament. In fact, it's not even contains most of the New Testament because we have minuscules out there, but in terms of the age purely. But was it well copied? No. Was there a lot of mistakes in it? Yes. Um, so there's an issue there. Right. So here's interesting. E.C. Cowell, Ernest Cadman Cowell, is going to demonstrate it's impossible to define an archetypal form for the so-called Alexandrian text type based on a vote for participating manuscripts. Yeah. A type. Yeah. Without an archetype, it's a fiction. That said, however, the common contamination attributed to Alexandria is not a fiction. Before he died, Kurt Aland, and in his book, The Text of the New Testament, he mentions this. He was the great champion of the Egyptian text. Wrote in 200 AD, the Gnostic presence and influence in Egypt was so persuasive, the manuscripts of Egypt could not be trusted. He also wrote at the time the use of Greek was dying out in Egypt. And the other thing as well, we also have to take into account that the Orion controversy happened in Egypt. Yeah, so Arius, he was a bishop who didn't believe that Jesus Christ was God. He was a created being, and therefore had an impact on the Trinity. And we know they followed through to the Nicene Council and the Nicene Creed in AD 325. Now, the point being is this: scholars have looked to Egypt, especially Alexandria, for their manuscripts. You had numerous Gnostic sects, right? Heretical sects in that area. You had the greatest, one of the greatest controversies, the biggest controversies since circumcision, the book of Acts, relating to the nature of Christ, happened in that same area. All right. So why should we trust a place which is one far removed from the apostles in terms of their writings and the autographs, and also a place which is a hotbed of heresy? Okay. Frederick Wise, I have that book here. Yeah, Frederick Wise, really good, complex book, but very good book. He collected 1,316. I know others say 1,356. And he uses test readings, Luke 1, Luke 10, and Luke 20, right? Three complete chapters. And looking at the variants, and he reduced those manuscripts to 37 groups or families, yeah? And plus 89 mavericks. So that's manuscripts so individually apart, they cannot be grouped, yeah? It so happens that 36 of the 37 groups fall into the Byzantine um, broad river of transmission. Yeah, right. So he found 70 subgroups within the 36, and he was able to define those relationships. The 37th group is the Alexandrian, which he assigned 15 manuscripts for the three chapters. So he's got 1,316 manuscripts, majority minuscules, and only 15 manuscripts, which equates to 1.1% of manuscripts. And this is what textual scholars lean on, about 1%, 2% manuscripts in their decisions. And these manuscripts were never copied. So what happened was to the Alexandrian group called B by von Soden. Von Soden called it 8 for, I'm not going to pronounce that word, which amount to 50 manuscripts. These manuscripts have been called the Alexandria or neutral text. The core members are Siniaticus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex L, 19892 minuscule. And he said, there's no reason why this group, which is the Alexandria group, should be treated different to any other group, as a group is grossly overrepresented in the critical apparatus over the last 100 years. So the pool which modern textual critics use for their decisions of readings is very tiny. So if you look at Luke, there's 1,316, but they only use 15, which is 1%, 1.1%. Yeah. Now, this is a very interesting comment by Ernest Cowell. Really interesting comment. I have to read this one in full. After careful study of all the alleged beta type witnesses, which is the Alexandrian, in the first chapter of Mark, so just one whole chapter of Mark, 6 Greek manuscripts emerged as the primary witness. Aleph, which is Codex Sinaiticus, B, Codex Vaticanus, L, minuscule 33, minuscule 892, minuscule 2427. Therefore, the weaker beta manuscripts, which is Alexandrian, CD 157, these are the numbers for minuscule, that's how they number them. 579, 1241, and 1340 were set aside. Yeah. Now you find a lot of these minuscules what they set aside. Your Metzgers and your Alans would use these to support particular readings. Therefore, the weaker beta ones were set aside. Yeah. On the basis of 6 primary witnesses. Yeah. An average or mean text was reconstructed. So basically, he would take these 6 manuscripts, and like say for example, if you had 4 manuscripts supported one variant, that would make up that mean texted particular reading. Yeah. So basically, on the basis of 6 primaries, the average or mean was reconstruction, including all the readings supported by the majority of the primary witnesses. Yeah. So basically, if all of them had a vote, right? So if you have 5 manuscripts support one particular reading, and so forth. Yeah. So even on this restricted basis of 6 manuscripts for the whole chapter of Mark, all right, this is what his study was, yeah? But his conclusions are very devastating, I think. Yeah, in the first chapter of Mark, the 6 was differed from the average beta type text or the Alexandrian. One chapter, Codex L, diverse 19 times. Western Hawk printed Greek New Testament 21 times. This is one chapter. Aleph Sinaiticus 26 times. This is one chapter of Mark. Minuscule 2427 32 times. 33 times Codex B, 34 times, and 892. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So L 19 times, with court 22 times, Aleph 26 times, Tivortism 32 times, uh, Mystical 33 times, B 34 times, 892 41 times. These results show convincingly, yeah, these results show convincing that any attempt to reconstruct an archetype for the Beta or Alexandrian text type on a quantitative basis is doomed to failure. The text thus reconstructed is not reconstructed, but constructed. It is an artificial entity that never existed. Yeah. A text type with no archetype cannot represent the original. Let me read that word. The text thus reconstructed is it Ernest Coward and Lloyd Crooks. The text thus reconstructed is not reconstructed but constructed. It's an artificial entity that never existed. And the text type, there's no archetype can represent the original. That is real devastating stuff there. Yeah. So I'm going to finish on that point there. All right. And next, I think I'm going to go into the Byzantine manuscripts. All right. So I'm going to talk about in terms of the Byzantine manuscripts and in terms of uh, why it is important, right, to uh, I believe in terms of that particular manuscript, all right, those manuscripts, that text type is the one to follow. So I believe in terms of the Byzantine stream. So my next video will talk about that Byzantine stream. And I'm probably getting ahead of myself now. The Byzantine stream, when I mean the Byzantine stream, I mean the majority of the manuscripts. Yeah, they're older, but also they have early attestations. So we're going to look into that. We're going to look in terms of the printed editions of the Byzantine stream. I'm not necessarily have to go into there's very few differences. So the Byzantine stream includes Text Receptacus, Robson Pierpoint, Hodges and Farstack Greek majority texts, patriarchal texts, and the Text Receptacus. All right. So God bless you, and that'll be my next session. It's about the Byzantine stream is the closest to the originals or the autographs. God bless you. God keep you. May cause His face to shine upon you.